Alright guys, video for pressurization. Had a request to do a pressurization video and what a lot of this stuff means up here. How to read it, how to use it, what it all means. So you're looking primarily at just these panels here, your pressurization controller and then the cabin indicators themselves. Obviously the packs and bleeds work into this as well, but our primary focus is just going to be on these gauges here. So what do you see on this gauge? So you got two dials here, the outer ring and the inner ring. Your outer ring is your differential pressure, and so that's going to be measured in pounds per square inch, and that's being measured between the inside of the aircraft, inside of the cabin, and outside of the airplane itself, outside. And so as you climb and the cabin pressurizes, this needle is going to wind its way all the way around here to about 8.4, maybe even as high as maybe slightly over that. Red line here is 9.1, so you're better never exceed that. The inner dial then here is going to be your cabin altitude, so what your altitude actually is, or the air is pressurized to inside the cabin. Just from recent memory, maybe 38,000 feet, level 380, you're going to probably be up here around 8.4, just in the bottom of the amber there, and your cabin altitude is probably going to be around 6,000 or 7,000 feet. So, you're sitting just above Denver in terms of altitude inside the aircraft. You got a climb, cabin climb indicator here, just like a vertical speed indicator, and it just tells you the rate at which the cabin is climbing or descending in 1,000 feet per minute here. So 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 foot per minute in this case. The cabin controller itself, you probably figured out by now, this is your flight altitude, so you're going to want to set this to your cruise altitude and your landing elevation or your landing altitude at destination. Couple lights up here at the top: auto fail, off schedule descent, alternate, and manual. So when you're flying around normally, you don't typically see any of these lights on. This is perfectly normal. Our checklist will actually say our response and our checklist is set and auto, so that our knob is in the auto position. Now if I go to alternate, you're going to see, of course, I get the alternate light that comes on. There's two channels to the controller that alternate back and forth each flight, and so if I go to alternate, I'm physically selecting the alternate channel, so I get this light here. Now if I was to have a failure of the primary channel at this moment, I would get both the auto fail and the alternate light to tell me that my primary channel failed, the alternate is taken over. If I get an auto fail without an alternate, that would essentially mean that both channels have failed. If I go over here to manual, now I've got the position here with this little gauge dial here for the position of the outflow valve, and I can now use this toggle to open and close the outflow valve, and you can watch that valve is moving there. And if we were to go around to the outside of the aircraft, stand out there, and we could physically watch that door open and close. So of course on the ground it's going to be in a full open position because we don't want the aircraft to be pressurized on the ground. You need to be able to open the door. So if I go back to auto, you can watch it's going to drive itself full auto open, just like it should. Off schedule descent is probably one you've seen or you will see. For instance, let's say we've got 380 in our window here, but our cruising altitude, all we ever do is get up to 360. For whatever reason, we don't make it all the way to 380, and we start our descent before we reach 380. The aircraft's going to know that we didn't make it all the way to 380, and we're going to get the off-schedule descent light. The checklist for that is, for the most part, is just reset the cabin the flight altitude window here to your current altitude, really, is what it comes down to, and that'll take care of that. That's pretty much what the checklist says. A couple placards here. Pressure differential limit for takeoff and landing is 0.125 psi. So again, you're looking on the outer gauge here, 0.125. If this is 1, this is basically 0.2. You need to be down here pretty darn close to 0. You want it almost 0 differential for takeoff and landing. And that is, again, going to be if you're over here in the manual mode and you're having to drive this thing manually. The checklist will also say, if you're using manual, to make sure that you open this valve fully somewhere around pattern altitude so you don't land the aircraft pressurized. You won't be able to open the doors. Also, if you're over here in manual, you have to use this valve left and right. This little placard down here is going to help you to decide or determine your current altitude and what you need to have the cabin altitude reading on that gauge. So, for instance, if you're at flight level 320, you're going to be roughly 7,000 feet cabin altitude. Again, the cabin altitude is a little scale on the inside, so this will tick here for 7,000 feet. You're going to want to use this valve very carefully because you're driving, again, you're opening that valve manually. And so you're going to want to watch this cabin climb, this rate of climb indicator here, to make sure that you're not climbing or descending the cabin too quickly, that it's going to be uncomfortable for the passengers. And there's ears popping back there. Altitude horn cutout button. So, you know, if our cabin altitude ever exceeds 10,000 feet, there's a warning horn, and it sounds an awful lot like the takeoff warning horn. And so we can actually use this button to cancel that horn if that horn ever starts going off. Now, of course, if we reach 10,000 feet and we get a cabin altitude warning, we're going to want to don the oxygen masks, set to 100%, and establish crew communication. And then at that point, you're either going to level off or start an emergency descent, depending on what your current altitude is. If you simply climbed out to 10,000 feet and forgot to pressurize the cabin, perhaps you forgot to turn your packs on, or your engine bleeds on for some reason, or you did an engine bleeds off takeoff and forgot to reconfigure the panel. Now you're climbing out through 10,000 feet, you're going to have a cabin altitude warning going off there. So that's also why the pressurization is on the climb check at 10,000 feet. A couple other things that I want to talk about, we're going to hit those in the air. So here we are sitting on the ground. We are cleared for takeoff. We've got our checklists complete. We're going to go ahead and get this thing off the ground, and we're going to do a couple things in the air for fun. Get ourselves stabilized. Looks like takeoff power is 95.7. Got a ton of gas here. I purposely made this thing heavy. So takeoff thrust, 95.7. .7 set. 80 knots. E1. Rotate. A little bit of crosswind here.
Positive rate climb.
Landing gear up. Positive rate. Landing gear up. LNAV is active. We'll just follow the command bars. Alright, set speed, climb thrust.
Southwest 1380, leaving my airspace frequency change approved.
Gonna put the autopilot on here so we can do some things here. Through the one bug, flaps up. Don't need to listen to that. And we got a clean jet. Let's clean up, and we'll go right into the pressurization here. Let's make sure we're climbing 380 is what we've got. We'll close the speed window, and we've got full climb power, so we can just devote our attention to the pressurization now. So our overhead panel, you can already see that we've got a cabin altitude now of about 1,000 feet. Took off the ground in Indianapolis there. We're about, I don't remember, a couple hundred feet, whatever it was. And our differential pressure is now up to about 2.3, 2.4 psi differential between the outside air and the inside air of the aircraft. Cabin is climbing ever so slightly here at about 200 to 300 feet per minute, and it's going to increase now It was probably down there because we were leveling off, or we reduced the climb rate to pick up the speed. Now that we got the speed, we're climbing up at a faster rate. The cabin picked its rate up a little bit here. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and let this thing climb out. And there's a few things that I want to do. So we're going to go back and take a look at what we're doing here, how we're doing here. And once we get through 10,000 feet, we're going to make note of this again. And of course, our 10,000 foot checks will do those as well. And we'll go ahead, since we got it anyway, we'll go ahead and get ourselves on course. Execute, LNAV, making the turn towards Terre Haute. Okay, out of 10,000 feet. Climb checklist, pressurization checked, start switches off, APU off. So out of 10,000 feet, how do we look? 10,000 feet should look about like that when you're doing your climb check. So your cabin altitude, now of course we were taking off out of Denver, our cabin altitude would be a lot higher. But Indianapolis here, we're still not even at 2,000 foot cabin altitude with about 4.0 differential pressure, PSI, 4 pounds per square inch. Cabin isn't climbing much, probably because we reached 10,000 feet, so the aircraft pitched over to try to, reach its climb speed, probably close to 300 knots. It's gotten close to the 300 knots, it's starting to pitch up again, and therefore the cabin is as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to accelerate time, because you probably don't want to sit here and watch this any much longer than I do. So we'll get ourselves going here, and we're going to zip up there real quick. And we can watch this thing really go fast now that we're in a good climb here. Now, obviously, it's going to continue to climb at 500 feet per minute out of 18,000 feet. Of course, the lights would come off. Altimeters 2992. But we're just focused on the pressurization, really. So we'll get this thing all the way up to altitude, 38,000 feet. I want to show you a couple things here that are sort of interesting. Now again, going to alternate isn't going to do a thing. Everything's going to work just fine. Why? Because I'm only on the side. I only commanded it to go to the alternate controller. So everything's just fine. Back to auto. Let's go back to our cabin, our cockpit view here for a second, see how we're doing. So again, we're out of 18, 2992 is set. Go ahead and climb a little quicker. Since we're in VNAV, we can open the window. Let's do a changeover to Mach. We'll keep it at about point, I don't know, 7.1 there. I'm not going to go below 280. In fact, let's just keep it no slower than 280. There it changed over to Mach, so we'll sort of mirror 280 until we get to about 7.6. That'll help increase the climb rate a little bit here. Or what we could do too is just go in the FMC here, go VNAV or climb rather, and go max rate or max angle. How about max rate? What's that give us? 0.71. Works for me. Close the window. Here we've got Mach 7.1. We'll zip on up to 38. Actually, it's commanding 258 knots /78. We better make that something a little better here. Yeah, looks like that'll be fine. Alright, so we're going to be at altitude very soon here. Let's look at the overhead again and see how we're doing now. So now we're awfully close to, we're getting closer to 38,000 feet here. We'll see where this settles out. I suspect it's going to be somewhere around 8.4 and around 7,000 feet. So now we're, we're cruising along here and we're doing just fine. So a couple things. What happens if we forget to pressurize our panel? If I turn both packs off, look at our cabin rate. So, what happens? It's a leaky airplane. It's not airtight. It's not going to be able to hold that pressurization. We're at 8 psi, so a lot higher pressure air inside the cabin than outside. It's naturally going to want to find its way outside. So what's going to happen? We're at 7 for 8, so we're almost at level 380. So what's going to happen? I mean, it's going to just continue to climb now at this point with the differential pressure dropping because the differential is getting lower because the cabin air on the inside of the aircraft is, it's climbing. And you'll see that even at 380, when we level off, let's take a look and see where we're at. I bet we're there because we accelerated the time. So we're at 380. It overshot a little bit with the increased speed there. So we're at 380. And our cabin altitude should be holding steady at about 8.4, 7,000 feet. You can see the cabin's still climbing because we're not pressurizing. The packs are off. So we're not pumping any air into the cabin. You can see too that the outflow valve is full closed, trying to do everything that it can to try and hold that pressure inside the aircraft. And the controller's saying, I need to close the outflow valve because I'm not at my program. So you can see your 10,000 feet. There goes the altitude warning. And if you take a look down here now, you're going to see we've got 2 altitude warning lights. Cabin altitude here in front of the captain, cabin altitude here in front of the FO. We'll go ahead and take a peek and do some other stuff here as well. So now, as we continue to climb the cabin, another thing's going to happen here at 14,000 feet. I can use this horn to cut out at this point if I don't want to listen to that beeping anymore. And again, as I said, this would be an issue here at 38,000 feet. You better already have your oxygen masks on and starting a descent. For the purposes of this, we're going to continue. Now, what I could also do too is go to manual. And if I open up this valve, watch what happens to the cabin. It's going to just climb even faster. Even if I just tickle it a little bit here, it's just going to climb even faster. So you can see how the manual position works, controlling the outflow valve manually. So here we are. We're at about 13,000 cabin altitude. We still have everything accelerated. But watch what's going to happen next here when we reach a cabin altitude of 14,000 feet. And once we do, we'll stop the time acceleration here. So there we go. Back to normal time on our cabin, or our acceleration. And we've got an overhead light with a master caution. So what do you think that is? Right up here we've got a passenger oxygen on light. So what's happened to the cabin? The masks have all dropped. Now I don't know if there's any way to go back there and look at those. I'm sure it would be interesting to see if they're modeled and hanging down now, but you can try that on your own. Part of the procedure would be also to unguard the switch, which is typically got a little wire holding it shut, and drop the masks or push the switch manually. That's to ensure that those oxygen generators are producing oxygen, that the masks have dropped and the oxygen generators are producing oxygen for the passengers. So that's about all I can really show you here. What we can do is go ahead and bring the packs back online and see what happens. Now you're going to watch. The controller's in charge here. I'm fully closed with the outflow valve. So what it's going to do is it's going to attempt to get itself back in parameters where it wants to be. And it's really taking full command here. It's really taking over and taking charge, and it's going to descend that cabin very quickly. This would actually probably be fairly uncomfortable on your ears, a 1,500 foot per minute descent rate to try to repressurize this cabin. So, of course, those masks have dropped. There's no going back on that one. That's a maintenance action. It's going to down the aircraft for some time. And what you would see is eventually this cabin would descend through 10,000 feet again. And that should extinguish our cabin altitude warning light here. Again, the master caution was from the passenger oxygen mask, so we'll cancel that. That's about all I can really think of that I can pass along. 10,000 foot call and checklist is important to make sure that this not only are your packs in auto or high, but your engine bleeds are on. That if you did an engine bleeds off takeoff, that you've reconfigured the panel. When you do your pressurization check at 10,000 feet, check these packs, check the engine bleed switches. Maybe just give a double check. What else have you got to do? Check these altitudes, and then of course, take a good look at your pressure gauge here. Make sure your differential pressure is out here somewhere around 2 to 3 psi. Cabin altitude's probably around 1 or 2,000 foot at that point at 10,000 feet. So it's essentially how it works. Hope that helps. Have a good one.